episode of the C-Suite Edge. I'm your host, John Light. I'm also the CEO and founder of Sabretooth Recruiting, and that brings me into contact with a lot of interesting people doing a lot of interesting stuff. Today I've got Jason Desentz, who's the CHRO of Toshiba here in the United States. Jason, thanks so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Well, I asked you on, and we're going to have a little bit different format here in just a moment, but I want to, in the context of asking you on, I want to kind of get a running start on why I think you are such a good person to tackle this particular problem or set of problems, and let's just be upfront about it, in merger and acquisition integration. Because, you know, a lot of deals get cut, whether it's Wall Street, Main Street, globally, whatever. But very few times have I seen people circle back and say, "Wow, the integration was so smooth and awesome," and we're hitting all of these great synergistic, whatever magical values are supposed to come out of this. And knowing we're going to tackle that, I think you have some interesting background that puts you in a unique position to address some of this. So maybe give us a quick 90-second rundown to get started, Jason, on your background and what's brought you to where you are today.
Yeah, thank you very much. So from that perspective, I have quite a unique background. Majority of my career is spent in the automotive industry out of Detroit, Michigan. I'm a Detroit guy, Midwest guy. But one thing about automotive that all of us have to learn is Lean Six Sigma, right? So what does
Mm-hmm.
that really mean? That actually means I'm a process-oriented leader, which means I take things and I look at them from a process standpoint. And obviously, Lean Six Sigma teaches us how to always be continuously improving, looking for a better way, but more importantly, getting rid of waste. So as we think of things throughout my career, that's kind of how my approach has gone, and which I believe is how I've been a really good integrator and actually process approach really does two things. One, it gives me a very high level objective look at
Mm-hmm.
what I'm going to be doing. And then it allows me to know when I need to bring in other people in and out of the conversation to get things done. So with that, majority of my career spent in automotive. I've had some opportunities then to move on and become a CHRO in a manufacturing space for a publicly traded company. I did that for many years. And then, honestly, quite honestly, I got a little burnt out as a CHRO. These jobs are very taxing
Right.
if you do them right, is what I would say. And unfortunately, a lot of sacrifice went with my family, which caused me to really think about, do I really want to watch my kids graduate high school? So I took an opportunity to be run my own consulting firm for 5 years, which was amazing because what it allowed me to do is take everything I've learned from like a manufacturing automotive space, but then learn from other industries like CPG,
Mm-hmm.
retail, biopharma, tech. And I had an opportunity to really help out all things advisory from an HR perspective for firms like that. And then I decided, okay, my kids are back in now in college. Now I'm ready to get back to the CHRO space. So luckily enough, I had the privilege and opportunity to join Toshiba, who had recently gone through delisting and were purchased by private equity.
Mm-hmm.
And that is kind of how I got here. And I know we're going to be talking about M&A, but a lot of what their activities are is how do we take the different businesses and create harmonization of our processes, procedures,
Mm-hmm.
and quite frankly, making things more efficient.
Well, isn't that the big bugaboo, right? Is when you have, and M&A we picked on because it's common, and
Hmm.
a lot of
Right.
people don't get to see what goes on, how the sausage is made in the PE space. But we're all familiar, and I bet many people listening to the podcast are people who have been impacted or been involved in M&A integrations. And
Sure.
there's actually, I think, a pretty relatively small cadre of people that deal on the front end. They do the due diligence, the deal making, and they kind of, in some cases, I think, and don't, and hopefully no one hates me for this too much, sometimes they just leave a big old bag of garbage dumped on your front step for you to deal with. Sometimes they leave it a nice bow, but then they don't necessarily understand how challenging bringing two sometimes disparate cultures, two disparate sets of looking at things together. And that, how do you quantify that? I don't know. But let's start with this. When you look at integrations, from your perspective, from your chair, what do you see as typically is the biggest problem, and how do you think we ought to address it better?
Yeah, I think sometimes it's very linear. And what I mean by that is the purchasing company goes into the new company and they always have that, hey, we got some swag for you. Hey, we brought a bunch of treats. Hey, we're gonna bring in food. Hey, we're gonna have a bounce house. Bring your kids. So they do all this excitement around those that they're purchasing. Guess what? Those that are back at headquarters we tend to take our eye off the ball of those folks. So what I mean by linear is they just look at it as a one way. We need to come in and save you, and I'm using air quotes here. But the reality of it is I think we need to. That is a big mistake. Is we take a one sided approach and we
Mm-hmm.
focus on maybe the decisions and how we're going to integrate, and we are very paternalistic in that on as a standard mode. However, I have seen great integrations go really well where you kind of have a dialogue between both groups. You get both
Right.
groups in a room, the key stakeholders, right? And you talk about the integration. What is that going to look like? What are some things you're concerned about? What are some things we're concerned about for those that are left over at headquarters, let's say, for example, of the what's that mean for us?
Mm-hmm.
And everyone wants to know what's in it for them. And too often we're afraid to even start with that. And I think we need to get the elephant out of the room in the room, just have a discussion about it right away.
Yeah.
But having a dialogue versus being paternalistic is definitely the first mistake I think many companies make.
I like the way you say that. You know, you shifted to paternalistic, but you started with linear. And I think you explained it because first I heard linear, I'm thinking time. But you're thinking direction we're going, and everything is coming from us as the leadership, if you will, and pushing toward you. And there's nothing coming. Not I wouldn't even say contrary to that, but there's no loop. So there's no opportunity for feedback. There's no opportunity for adjustment. All the adjustments are made with one person at the helm, and we're depending completely on their perspective. And I don't know about you, but I look around sometimes. I see CEOs. I've dealt with executives at a number of companies where sometimes I'm not sure they're sure, or maybe they are sure, but they really don't know what's going on in their business at a granular level. And by granular, I'm talking about the people who are executing the strategy, and that's a huge, huge blind spot. But you bring up something really interesting, I think, with this linear view, paternalistic linear view of things. And I'm curious, how many times do companies have to make the same mistake in integration before they will do something different than what they've done before?
What I've found is it takes the very special, authentic, vulnerable leader to really step up and make a comment about it. Too often we just someone's like, well, that's not for me to say. That should be for Bill to say or Sally to say. And the reality of it is we that tells me a lot about your current culture. That do you really have a speak up culture? Because in my opinion, anyone at the leadership level has the ability to say what direction we should go and given any observation that they see.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're not run that way traditionally, and have only two or three people out of the group that make all key decisions, well, naturally they're waiting for them to say something. So I think it's upon us as leaders to actually speak up more when we
Mm-hmm.
see it, because honestly, not always to your point, the CEO is going to see it clearly, but that's what she or he should be relying on their direct reports and their leadership team to tell them. A good leader surrounds themselves by leaders that say, hey, we should be considering this, or hey, be careful if we're going to do that, that could cause this.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't have a speak up culture as far as the leadership, and that's what Lean Six Sigma also teaches you, right? That anybody can stop the line, so to speak, if you think about a manufacturing perspective.
Right.
And that's because they see a safety concern or some concern with, how the process is being run. If leadership, meaning CEOs, have a good team that speak up, these things are caught early.
Mm-hmm.
And they're also then at the end of the day, where I see things fail miserably is if you don't have a plan. And a plan consists of timelines, it consists of communication plans, it consists of cost controls, it consists of anything from a reporting and dashboard perspective. These are things that have to be thought out originally before we say go. And that's where a lot of folks, in my opinion, tend to fail.
Well, I mean, we can have plans, right? But
Yeah,
and
true.
we need to have plans, but we also need to have the flexibility that you only get by planning.
Correct. That's why you have to have that dialogue and not just be a
Yeah.
paternalistic approach walking in saying, well, here's our cookie cut. How many audits have you been through when an auditor reads you a question? You're like, is that for Amazon or is that for someone my size? Because it seems like you're just reading off a script. And that's my point that sure, you can have a style or a method or approach to M&A, but you still have to customize it to what your goals are. Like, what are your goal? What's the intended goal of this integration? It's a weird question to ask. Well, It's not actually. It's something we should all just talk about in a high level perspective. And then, okay, how are you CFO going to align with those goals? How are you HR head of HR going to align with those goals? It's no different than doing goal planning at my current company. It's what you do for that particular M&A. We all have a part.
Yeah, yeah, and it's funny that you would say what you just said too. Um, I have a philosophy. I don't run in our recruitment practice. I don't run job description. I don't put ads out whatsoever. And one of the reasons is that it's like putting a net in the water and hoping the right fish swims into it versus going spear fishing for the right fish immediately, knowing what you want, what does good look like, and going after that. And but one of the things I've noticed though is that you have mom and pop over here, $100-200 million company. We're ready for a developer. We're ready for a full stack engineer. We're ready for a software engineer. And well, who am I competing with to get that person in the job market? Well, I'll tell you who they're not competing with. They're not competing with Apple or Amazon because they'll squash them like grapes. And so you can't take a job description from one and, to your point, apply it to the other. You've got to get to know what does good look like in this context. And it's funny to me because I grew up in a time where, and this is not a word you hear much of, hermeneutics. How we interpret something that's written. When we look, these keys, this paradigm of filters, how we take in this information, and why can we not apply that to business in the sense of understanding the context before we just try to your point, cookie cutter it? Because I know when I was in the waste industry, we were buying mom and pops left and right. And even though we had a processor integration, there are enough nuances that you had, I think, a slow demonstration of chaos theory from Jurassic Park. The water running this way and that way from slight imperfections in the skin. No, it's because you're wondering why is the AR, why is the DSO so out of whack? And you're talking to a prior owner and they lean into you and they ask you. I ask them, if someone pays cash, what was your process to record this so you knew who to collect from and not? And the guy leans into me and he says, well, you're not above a little bit of larceny once in a while, are you, John? I'm like, I'm way beyond a lot of larceny.
Wow. Wow. Check, please.
It's too late. We already paid him. We're
Oh
stuck
boy.
with it.
Oh boy.
How do you deal? You talked about with me. What's in it for me and
Yeah.
being on the front end with that. Could we talk for a second about how you approach that and what if what's in it for me is not something I want or is negative or I perceive it as negative? I'd be curious to get your thoughts and experience around that.
Yeah, I mean, not everyone's going to like Nuco, right? When you join
Mm-hmm.
them together, and I think the more information you provide in the FAQs and manager talking points to prep managers because they're going to get questions. I also think you need to know if and let them know that it's okay if this isn't what they're in for and they don't want to join. So then what? So what's next? We need a way for people to self-identify. Also, there's not. You'll be surprised how many will.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people are afraid, well, I'm going to lose my greatest employee. You might.
It's
You just might
possible.
anyways.
Yeah.
So isn't it better for you to want to have the conversation ahead of time before they go get a job and then it's already too late? So I have a strong communication plan. We talk about that almost in the very well, we do talk about it in the first
Mm-hmm.
session. Is okay. How are we going to now communicate the plan, the process with the employees, the levels, the managers? Because and then how frequent are we going to do it? Your communication plan almost needs to be as robust as your actual M&A plan. And I think there's science behind it, there's reasons behind it, but then also if you can have people self-identify, great. If you can't, do risk assessment. In my opinion, set the leaders down and say, okay, who do we think is going to be at risk? But then also why? What are the qualifiers? You need to come up with qualifiers. If one, someone's going to lose, if it's going to be more bureaucracy to do their job, that is definitely a possibility because now there's more steps and stuff because the
Right.
bigger companies sometimes tend to have more steps versus your
What?
larceny. Yeah, versus your larceny thing just there. So we just wrote it in the book. We didn't care. Or we use the P card or we use the petty cash, right? Yeah, that doesn't exist anymore. And I think you just need to be honest with them because, especially when you buy a family owned business, it will change and you need to let them know what does change, but also what typically remains the same. And what do you gain from joining? And a lot of times in that respect, I talk a lot about career development and growth. You only had so many jobs that you could go for in this company. Now you're part of a bigger group. Your
Hmm.
career development, if you want it, will be either greater for you at the new co than it will be at your smaller little firm back in the day.
I think we have to acknowledge too that anytime you integrate two companies, there's going to be some level of cultural shock.
Oh God, yeah.
And when I think culture, I'm not sophisticated. I didn't go to Harvard or Stanford for an MBA or anything like that. But I will tell you this: I've been around the block a few times, and I think when you look at it in a business context, culture is just how we go about getting stuff done. It's how we go about our business. And if you have a company you acquire and it's a fire drill all day, every day, and you're pulling them to some place that we have processes, we have controls, we have this, there are going to be a lot of people who don't, I won't say don't fit, but aren't willing to make the necessary adjustments because it requires energy and time and thought and discipline and regimen. On the flip side, if it was going the other direction, you could have something very similar going on. So I'm curious, when you're dealing with very disparate cultures, do you approach the integration from prioritizing the value from the acquisition or merger, or prioritizing how do we get these cultures to align, these people to align with the culture that we want to be the successor culture? Because that's really, in my opinion, what ends up driving the most value over time. I'm curious how you would approach that.
To me, I don't even think about. I'll say this at this point: it's not my job to think about the financial reasons why we bought them. That has already been had, and reason why we purchased them. We entered in the
Right.
LOI and we started to get going. So you're absolutely right. Step two is how are we going to integrate the cultures, and it should be a dialogue, like I said earlier, because they may have a cultural aspect about them that we never thought of that we really want to adopt in our current culture. So that's why, if it makes sense, and I'm not saying you do this every but if you find that aha moments like, wow, they have it's not about they're, let's say, for example, they don't talk about innovation, they talk about iteration.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something interesting because I actually feel like more companies do more iteration versus innovation because they just take something that already exists and they make it better. Maybe that's a value we always have innovation in ours, our current company. Maybe that's one we should change into ours because that's a really good way of putting it. That's a
Mm-hmm.
better way for us to inspire more, is to say just because we have it today doesn't mean we can't make it better for tomorrow. And I think that might be an example of how you would adopt one of their cultural values into yours. But 9 times out of 10, yes, you're really instituting your cultural values upon the new co. But then you also have to be really honest with them too and say that, again, um, this is your opportunity to actually take advantage of maybe, let's say, low performers,
Mm-hmm.
both companies as you're doing an M&A. Because, usually there's duplicative roles. Not usually, there always is
Yeah.
duplicative processes and roles, and somebody will be eliminated at some point, or a process will be eliminated at some point. Well, how do you pick? And it's not always from the new company you're going to eliminate. You have
Mm-hmm.
an opportunity on your internal side to talk about your current staff, and that is also a conversation that should be had very early on. So you have your list of employees that you're going to integrate, and then you also have a list of employees that will be displaced because of the.
And you can only successfully have that if you come from a place and disposition of not being strictly linear and paternalistic.
Amen. Yes.
On that note, Jason, let me ask you this, man. If somebody wants to dive a little bit deeper on this topic, and I know if they look behind the curtain, there's a million other things. I know we could probably, if schedules allowed, keep rolling. But what's the best way for someone to find you and get in touch?
Yeah, I mean, you can find me. I'm not on very many social media platforms. I try not to be. Actually, that's purposeful. LinkedIn's the best choice. So look me up on LinkedIn. I'm usually pretty responsive. I check in almost every day. I try to post really interesting content if I can. Usually, my podcasts are definitely out there. If you're interested, you can see past podcasts. This is something that I love to do in my career, is to give back and to teach and coach and mentor. I have many mentors and coaches myself to this day. Most of them are CEOs who are my coaches. So I am a business person who happens to do HR. So if you're interested in looking me up, find me on LinkedIn.
Love it. Love it. Jason, thanks so much for joining me.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.